So, Mr. Sprinkel, with respect to Spencer Wright, or the person that Detective Thorpe spoke to before taking out the warrants, and the jail call that you listened to.
Correct.
Is my memory correct that you said that investigator David White was the person who then spoke with or went out and reached out to the person that Mr. Wright called from the Atlanta City Jail?
That is correct.
And the information that you received or that you were able to gain from that phone call made from the Atlanta City Jail, what impact did it have on your investigation into the murder of Donovan Thomas?
It corroborated what I already believed, which was that Spencer Wright, who initially provided the name of Nicholas Robb.
I'm going to object to that testimony. As to relevance, his belief is not relevant.
Sustained.
So as a result of the information that you got from that phone call, with respect to information that would assist you further in the investigation, what did you do after you listened to the phone call and had Detective White speak to Mr. Smalls?
Well, I spoke with Detective White. Well, broadly, I just embarked on the investigation of the murder of Donovan Thomas, because at that point I was essentially I was certainly without sufficient evidence.
Okay.
I can no longer rely on that statement.
All right. Now, at the time that you got the file, had Kenneth Copeland already been interviewed?
He had been.
All right. And when you reviewed that, those interviews of Kenneth Copeland, did you endeavor to speak with him anymore, or did you gain more information from the interviews themselves that assisted you in your investigation?
Well, as the investigation, as the months went by, I did desire to speak with Kenneth Copeland, but that did not happen. He wasn't willing to speak with me.
How many of his interviews did you have at your disposal?
Well, I believe there were 3. There was one in particular from June of 2015.
That was the 9-hour interview?
That would be the 9-hour one, yes.
Right. Did you set out to corroborate anything that you found? I'm sorry.
Sustained.
Yeah, I didn't hear the objection, so that
Leading.
Oh, okay. With respect to the Kenneth Copeland interview, did you take it at face value, everything that you heard in the interviews, or did you do anything to decide how you would treat the information?
Well, on listening to the interview and taking notes, I endeavored to corroborate as much of his statement as I could.
Okay. Did that involve listening to other interviews and jail calls as well?
Yes.
Would you tell the jury what other interviews you listened to without talking about what was said in the interviews themselves?
Sure. Well, there was the interview of Demeke and Garlington. There was an interview of Quindarius Zachary. And when I say there was an interview, I'm contemplating in my mind that there was only the one, but it is possible there were perhaps 2 or even 3 interviews, but I'm only recalling off the top. They may have all just run together as I listened to them. But as far as I know, there was at least one interview of everybody that I'm mentioning right now.
Okay. And with respect to Quindarius Zachary, did you take part in a 2017 proffer of Quindarius Zachary or include that as a part of your file?
I did, and it was recorded. I have it on a disc over here as well.
All right. And did you also listen to the August 2015 interview of Mr. Zachary?
I believe so. Yes, that would be the one.
Would you tell the jury what cell phone records or what cell phone numbers you found of interest after listening to the interviews?
Well, there would probably be a few, but I do, and I can't recall at the top of my head what specific cell phone numbers were mentioned during each interview. For example, depending on the interview, the party may have identified their own cell phone number or somebody else's cell phone number. But the numbers that were primarily of interest to me were those for which Detective Tyrone Dennis obtained phone records. And the numbers that he obtained, I believe, were primarily, if not exclusively, from either A, the interviews that he conducted, or B, from cell phones that he found during the course of his investigation. He was able to forensically analyze and extract the number therefrom.
Now, you mentioned last time you were on the stand getting the videos or the surveillance videos enhanced, the ones from the Texaco and the barbershop.
Yes.
Was there any other surveillance footage that you were able to obtain that was not a part of the original file that Mr. Detective Thorpe gave to you? Is the surveillance footage from the Texaco and the barbershop the surveillance footage that you used in making your decisions about what to look for next in this case?
From what I recall, I was primarily, if not exclusively, focused on the surveillance footage from the Texaco and the barbershop.
Okay. Who had you listened to the interviews from by the time that you did go into and look at the surveillance footage from the Texaco and from the barbershop, or did you do that first?
Well, so I watched the surveillance footage many times. I'm sure I listened to while I was watching the interviews, I watched various parts of the footage. After I watched the interviews, I watched various parts of the footage. It wasn't as regimented as I had like a checklist where I watched the videos and then I watched the interviews, and I would keep revisiting things as I went through the case file.
Other than looking for someone in a particular place like a park bench in the surveillance footage, what was it that the surveillance footage was able to give to you that you found of value in this investigation?
Well,
I'm going to object to the form of the question. What he found of value is not relevant, and I would ask that...
I can rephrase.
Okay, thank you.
What from the surveillance footage were you able to utilize in furthering your investigation?
Well, first of all, it marked the exact time of the homicide, which broadly is just very important because it allows me to establish a time.
Objection again to the testimony. What he found to be important is not relevant. I'd ask that that be struck.
Your Honor, I'd ask permission to respond. With respect to what DDA Sprinkel did in gaining information about this homicide, as with any other witness, we'd ask that the court allow him to give the jury insight into how he gained the information that he got and made the decisions that he made.
Okay, let's just stick to the facts without value judgments. Go ahead.
Okay. After you were able to get phone records, listen to the interviews, were you personally or your investigator able to obtain social media records?
Yes.
How did you decide which social media records in this case you needed to look at?
Again, objection. How and why is not relevant. What he obtained is relevant.
Your Honor, how and why?
Overruled.
Thank you.
Well, I was focused on the social media of the parties that were of interest, either persons of interest, maybe witnesses, just as much. Whenever a name came up, I endeavored to find their social media, regardless of whether or not I actually thought that they were directly involved in the homicide. Perhaps there'd be something on their social media that would shed some light or illuminate something for me.
Now, did you ever look at the social media of a Quindarius Zachary?
I do, yes. I recall looking at his social media, yes.
Do you recall what his handle or handles were for various social media platforms?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Would looking at your report refresh your memory?
Yes.
Would you please look at your report?
Yes, and that's what's on the laptop in front of me, incidentally.
Okay.
Yeah. I just have it so I can do word searches.
All right.
I mean, I know he went by the moniker Lil Dee.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, unless you can point me to it, I don't know that I actually put a screenshot or an image from Mr. Zachary's, any of his social media in my report.
Okay. I'm going to show you what has been marked as State's Exhibit 360 Yankee. At what point did you begin looking for social media photos related to Javaris Bradford?
That would have been, again, I don't know the specific date. But
and I don't mean the date. I mean, what was your attention turned to Javaris Bradford?
Mr. Bradford caught my interest after, because as I said, I already had phone records belonging to various parties. These were phone records that I think were primarily, if not exclusively, obtained by investigator Tyrone Dennis. He caught my interest after I saw his number and his number being 404-957-8008. His number I found in the phone records of Quindarius, Zachary, Demise McMullen, Kenneth Copeland, and Calvin Treadwell, meaning that I called detail records for those four people. And as I looked through them, I found that in close temporal proximity to the homicide, or maybe not, when I say close temporal proximity, it could be like within a day or two of the homicide, not necessarily within like 10 minutes. But I saw that he was that number, and I didn't know whose number it was when I first saw it, was a common number between them. In addition to that, when I ran it through the Fulton County Jail inmate call database, I found that another person who was an associate of those four people called that number, and that'd be Martinez Arnold. Okay. Martinez Arnold, aka Duke, was an inmate at the Fulton County Jail. So I ran 404-957-8008, which are 404-957-8008 through the Fulton County Jail's inmate call database, and I found two calls, I believe, that were placed from Martinez Arnold on the night of the homicide. And I think the first one was at 8:18 p.m., which was an hour after the murder. Mm-hmm. And so after I listened to those calls, I wanted to know a little bit more about Mr. Javaris Bradford. And as part of that process, I found his Instagram page.
And 363 Yankee.
I recognize these, yes.
How do you recognize them?
These were, I found Mr. Bradford's Instagram page. The moniker that he went by on said Instagram page was that is spelled IM _living, LIVING _great. When I found a picture or a post being a picture, sometimes with text accompanying it, although on these four pictures, it doesn't appear that Mr. Bradford actually posted any text along with the pictures. So those pictures, I screenshotted them. And these were the screenshots that I actually took as I viewed Mr. Bradford's Instagram page, the content of which was visible to the public.
Okay. And are those fair and accurate representations of the pictures depicted on the pages that you were looking at for Mr. Bradford?
They are, yes, they're printouts of the digital images that I captured, yes.
Social media posts.
360 Yankee depicts Javaris Bradford standing behind a Pontiac Bonneville, a gray in color Pontiac Bonneville. And I want to make sure, I think it's a 2002 Pontiac Bonneville. I want to get that right, so I'm refreshing my recollection. But I'm pretty sure it's a 2002 Pontiac Bonneville. But at any rate, it's a gray in color Pontiac Bonneville. And the reason why that caught my interest is because there was actually several photos that I found that depicted him alongside a Pontiac Bonneville, and that caught my interest because it let me know that that was probably the car that he could be found in.
Okay. Why were you interested in a gray Pontiac Bonneville at the time that you saw these images on Mr. Bradford's page?
Well, at the time I saw these images, I wasn't.
Okay.
I mean, not really.
What did you see or hear, without getting into what anyone said, that caused you to take interest in these photographs? If it was an interview, he does not have to say what that person said. It doesn't cause.
Well, I can say this. I looked at the surveillance footage, And I knew that there was some type of gray car or cars that were involved. So gray car in general would have caught my interest. And when I say surveillance footage, I'm referring to the surveillance footage from the cameras that were mounted on 330 McDaniel Street, that being the barber shop in the parking lot of which Donovan Thomas stood at the time that he was shot and killed. But then there was other surveillance footage from the Texaco station. And so to be clear, just so we're clear as to how the process went, when I first found these images, I was kind of generally interested. I said, oh, a gray vehicle. Okay, a gray sedan. But then as I went back and I reviewed the surveillance footage from the Texaco station yet again, I became considerably more interested in these images because I saw a gray Pontiac Bonneville on that footage in close temporal proximity to the homicide. And because that Texaco station was in close spatial proximity to the barber shop, that particularly caught my interest.
When you said you went out and looked at the scene, were you able to determine and explain to the jury how far the Texaco that you were looking at, the images on the Texaco that you were looking at, were from the barber shop at 330 McDaniel Street?
It was about 100 yards.
Okay. And would that extend beyond the doors of this courtroom, out to the elevator, or something a little bit different?
It would be from about where I sit right now, probably about twice the distance from where I sit right now to the elevator. So from here to the elevator, double that.
All right. Now, when you were out there, was there a line of sight from where you were looking at on the Texaco footage to the front of 330 McDaniel Street?
Yes.
All right. Did you notice whether there were any street lamps or any kind of lighting out there as well?
There were. I don't recall if they were working.
Okay.